My name's Melissa Rosenberg. I'm with the Autism Society of Maryland. Thank you for joining us this evening for Self-Love for Self-Advocates. This is the first webinar in a series of 4 that are planned for this year. They will explore the importance of self-love and self-understanding for autistic self-advocates who experience loneliness and isolation. The goal of the series is to share tools and perspectives from past challenges and help participants chart a path forward for their lives. So before we introduce our panelists for this evening, I want to invite, we will be offering simultaneous Spanish translation and interpretation this evening. We're going to remain together, and I'm going to invite Alicia to give us some instructions in Spanish and in English on how to access our Spanish language room. Alicia, will you give those instructions for us? I'd like to introduce our panelists for this evening. Stephen Isaacson is works as a senior group facilitator for DC Peers. He's a job coach by training and enjoys working with folks on the spectrum in community-based settings. He recently earned his master's degree in social work at the University of Maryland, Baltimore. When he's not working, Stephen is tending to his plants, camping, hiking, and pet sitting. And Stephen is on the autism spectrum. Kristen Letnick draws on her professional background in mental health counseling and case management to support the needs of the awesome Montgomery County autism community. Following her autism diagnosis as an adult, Kristen began working for autism nonprofits in a variety of support, education, and management roles, serving families and autistic adults. In her current position, Kristen represents AWESOME, and that's the Autism Society of Maryland in Montgomery County. She provides information and referral services and coordinates programming for the local autism community, leading AWESOME's Spectrum in the Spotlight adult group. And in her spare time, she enjoys online research, exploring local fairs, and watching TV with her cats. And I wanted to share that Stephen and Kristen are developing this 4-part series. And so delighted to have them with us to kick it off tonight. So I'll turn it over to you all.
Great. Thank you, Melissa. Hi, everybody. Nice to see you here today. Let's get started here. So I'm just going to share my screen. Can you see the slides there? So welcome again. This is the first session in a 4-part series, as Melissa said, on self-love and autistic people. Today we'll be introducing the topic of isolation and loneliness. And so this really is the first session in a 4-part series. Today is going to be a little bit more about education and just overall, an overview of the topic and sort of what we mean by self-love in the context of loneliness and isolation. The next series, the next part is really going to talk about, how do we, so you want to make some friends, you want to maybe crawl out of, isolation or loneliness. So some people have been moving to the online space for that. And so we'll start to gather some tools to sort of make our way through that. Of course, that comes with lots of safety issues as well. So we wanted to cover that next time. But today is really about introducing the topic and overall the series as a whole. So what we're really looking to get done today is of course, define what we mean by loneliness and isolation. They're actually 2 different things. They're actually separate, but they're very related. And so we have a general understanding of that. And then if some of you were on the dating and relationships talk that I gave last time, I'm a huge fan of sort of thinking about where we get our ideas about these things from, and how are we framing, our thoughts, and our judgments on certain things. So we'll be talking a little bit about that, where we get our ideas about loneliness and isolation from. Loneliness and isolation in autistic people is different than these 2 in the general population. And so there's some general reasons, but also some specific reasons for why autistic people might feel lonely. And of course, bringing this back to the overall sort of reason for the series is to promote self-love and self-acceptance during this Autism Acceptance Month, which is in April. We thought that this would be very relevant for self-understanding and acceptance of ourselves, and then how do we learn a little more about ourselves and help us meet our goals. As we were going through this and reviewing it, we wanted to make sure that we put in a trigger warning. Just today, we'll be talking about, some sensitive topics around feeling lonely and social skills and how we feel about ourselves. And so that can be sensitive for some people. It can be a trigger point for some people who've thought about that in their own lives. And so we wanted to just let people know that if it is becoming too much at any given point today or in the series as well, you're more than welcome to take a step away and take some time. If you need to log off and come back, that's fine. But we also wanted to provide the 988 number there. If you are having thoughts of suicide or self-harm, just dial 988 on your phone and you can talk confidentially to somebody wherever you are in the country. So just wanted to put that out there for everybody who, just as a blanket statement, just, so that we cover that. Okay, so I did want to just get us started. We're gonna do Slido. So if you can pull out your phone or a device that you're using, we're going to be doing an interactive poll. So you can take a picture of this QR code, or you can type in the numbers you see there. You can go to slido.com. You can go to slido.com and type in those numbers, or you can take a picture of the QR code. And the first question, we just wanted to get started tonight, just sort of ground ourselves and sort of who we have here tonight. The question is, in the last year, or really in the last period, how often have you experienced loneliness? You can say sometimes or all the time, or not at all. Or if you don't know, that's okay too. So we have roughly 25 people on the call tonight. So sounds like most people sometimes experience loneliness. Some folks experience loneliness all the time. If you don't experience loneliness at all, that's perfectly okay too. But if you're here tonight for an introduction to loneliness and isolation, chances are you might have some questions about, where loneliness comes from or how to get out of it. Really is a huge question for a lot of folks. And so it's actually, I'm sorry that, some people experience loneliness, but it's actually, in my mind, since we're all here tonight, it's if we want to think about it another way, uh, you look at that, 64% of people sometimes experience loneliness. That means that you're in if you experience loneliness, you're in good company. It means you're not the only one, and it's not something that you're experiencing alone or by yourself, which is kind of ironic. Loneliness experiencing by yourself. It's good to know, I guess, that there's other people who might have the same question you do. And I think sometimes that's comforting. Sometimes when we think of an issue we're having, we might think, oh, we're the only ones experiencing this. And as you see here, other people have the same thoughts and feelings as you maybe. So hopefully tonight we'll be able to provide some resources and tips to really help us. If it's a cycle for you, hopefully to help you get out of the cycle of loneliness. maybe start the process of dipping your toe into the water, right? So coming up with some ideas for social activities or engaging in activities that you really enjoy. Well, that's really the goal for tonight, is to get the conversation started on this topic. All right. So it looks like things have calmed down. So looks like most, if not everybody, has some point in the last year. Oh, oh boy. Oh, my cat just screamed. Sorry about that. Yeah, so it looks like 100% of people here have experienced, loneliness at some point in the past year. So that means that everyone might have questions, and hopefully we're here to answer those tonight. I've never heard him scream like that before. I'm so sorry. All right. So Kristen, this one's yours.
Yeah, so sorry about your cat. I hope he's okay. But let's start with the general definitions. Isolation is oh, the chat keeps popping up. Hold on one second. All right. So isolation is lack of social connections, while loneliness is not feeling included and includes that perception of not feeling included as well. So to get into this a little further, isolation is defined as the process of isolating or being isolated, which is not entirely helpful on its own. But what we would say is to isolate is to cause a person or place to be alone or to remain apart from others. And while there are other definitions of isolating, since I know I'm speaking to autistic adults, we're going to be talking about social isolation specifically. And social isolation is a lack of social connectedness, or like a deprivation of it. And that's seen as a major barrier to achieving a sense of positive well-being, self-esteem, and self-acceptance. Social isolation has both objective and subjective components to it. The objective social isolation is the amount of social contact a person actually has, like with their support system, or if they're living alone, if they're living with other people, they go to a day program, etc. And then there's subjective social isolation. This is more about perception, as in our perception of our social connections and relationships. So how we perceive our support system, our perceived friendships, relationships, etc. And this actually relates right back into loneliness, which is kind of why we're putting the two topics together. Loneliness is a form of subjective social isolation, and it is defined as a negative emotional state that results from the gap between a person's desire for relationships and the relationships they actually have in reality. And one additional factor there, other than the factors of kind of real versus desired connections, which include romantic relationships and friendships, as well as family relationships, acquaintances, is called collective loneliness. And that actually is an area that needs more research currently. Collective loneliness is how much the autistic adult feels a sense of belonging, or how much they feel like they fit into society. You can go to the next slide if you want. Okay, so to talk a little bit about the research that's currently out there, which isn't much. In general, when it comes to loneliness across all people, the research says the consequences of loneliness can vary, but includes a variety of physical and mental health issues, which makes sense. However, there isn't a ton of research on loneliness and isolation in autistics at this time, especially autistic adults. But I did want to cover, what is out there. One theory why there isn't a lot of research on this topic is due to the old stereotype definitions and concepts that a lot of people still have of autism. People previously thought that all autistics just preferred to be alone and would always be alone. Some of you might know. And over time, we've obviously been learning that this isn't necessarily true, and that there can be interest in social connections from a lot of autistic adults. It can just be complicated due to negative experiences autistics can have with socializing over time. Most of the research that has been done has been just focused on children and teenagers, so we know a little bit about that from them. Luckily, there's been more research and interest in it lately as it relates to adults. So while there's still controversy over whether or not there are actually issues in autistic adults with loneliness, the research is at least starting to be done. And I just want to take a second and say, I think somebody's mic is still on. If you can turn that off, because it's distracting me, I would appreciate that. Okay, thank you. I just like hear someone breathing and I'm autistic. So going back to what I was saying, basically, there's still a lot of research that needs to be done with autistic adults. And unfortunately, there's still some controversy because there are a lot of people that still believe kind of the old stereotypes that we're trying to change. To address this confusion over the significance of the issue of loneliness, more research that needs to be done really needs to address the autistic adults themselves and really involve them in the research process, which can be an issue. Research needs firsthand accounts of autistic adult experiences, and they need to involve measuring and assessing loneliness in a way that's more specific to autistic adults and how we experience it, rather than just typical loneliness assessments. And Stephen kind of alluded to that before. And just like more research is needed on loneliness in autistic adults, most typical autism interventions don't currently target the issue of loneliness. Because again, there's still this stereotype that autistics, whether you're a child or you're an adult, are fine being alone and don't need connections. And we know that's not true. And then we've got some factors, though, that increase loneliness in autistic adults in the few research studies that are out there. And some of those factors are anxiety, depression, having autism, having autistic traits, masking too much, which is kind of like camouflaging your autism traits when you're out in society. Unemployment is a factor that increases loneliness in autistic adults. A lack of autism awareness, understanding, and acceptance from society. A lack of self-acceptance. And then also negative past experiences and the often resulting development of a concept called learned helplessness. And that is where a person has a lot of the same negative experiences and outcomes over and over again, such as with socialization, and they weren't able to control the situation or change it. And it just kind of always ended up being a negative experience. And so as a result, gradually over time, they stopped trying because they learned that it never made a difference. And that can obviously impact a person over time and then cause them to stop reaching out. But there are also factors that decrease loneliness in autistic adults. And those are having relationships, which include not just romantic, but also social and familial. Having fewer challenges with social skills overall. The next one's interesting. It's being female instead of being male on the spectrum, which is a can of worms I'm not going to delve into now, but spending time engaged in activities in general, especially your special interests, can help decrease loneliness. Social skills training can actually help. But a note about this is when I was reading about therapists who work with autistic adult clients, they've noted that social skills training can end up increasing loneliness if the person doesn't feel accepted for who they truly are during these interventions. Because this can cause a situation in which we might physically be less isolated if we're going out into the world. So we're experiencing less isolation, but we can still feel lonely when we're doing that due to masking our real selves, doing that camouflaging thing because we don't feel accepted. These interventions can teach autistics to mask their traits and can result in autistics believing that they won't be accepted by society if they don't mask them. And then they can also end up not accepting themselves in the process because that's kind of like what they've been taught. So surprise, surprise, the last factor that decreases loneliness in autistic adults is self-acceptance. And that's what we hope you can gain from our series. Next slide. Back to Stephen.
Yeah, thanks so much, Kristen. Really, really good points. I am a huge fan of reframing, and so thinking about where we get our thoughts from, and then maybe thinking about checking the validity of those thoughts, checking them against reality. So one point I really wanted to make, I've been thinking about this a lot, is the standard we hold autistic people to and people with disabilities in general. Versus the general population, so people who aren't autistic or don't have disabilities. People in the general population are also isolated and do feel lonely a lot of the time. In general, as you get older, if you haven't started a family, your friends might have family, right? And so they might have less time. And so people end up drifting apart as you get older. That's sort of like a natural part of aging, I'd say, under the system we work and live under. But if you have ever been to the grocery store in the past few years, or any like retail shop, the self-checkout or really convenience options that the pandemic has really ushered in as consumers, that has really strived to increase isolation, around just people in general. If you think about self-checkout, you really don't need to talk to anybody. You don't, if you go to the grocery store, you just check I get apples and avocados and I just type in the number myself. If I don't want to talk to anyone, I don't have to. All right. If we're at home and we want to get food, or of course, it's an accessibility thing, right? If you're unable to go to the grocery store, it's a really good way to make grocery shopping more accessible. But on the flip side too, a lot of people in the general population tend to sometimes use it just as a way to not talk to people, and it's super isolating if we think about society in general, and that has trickle down effects socially between people. And so when we think about autistic isolation and loneliness, um, it's uh, it's helpful in my mind to think about it in the context of broader trends, especially since the pandemic. But we know that this has been happening before COVID as well.
Sorry, excuse me,
Yeah.
Stephen. We have some, can everybody make sure you're muted, please? Please make sure you're muted. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, so that might answer the question, is this, if I feel lonely, is this something that maybe I've done wrong, or is it actually something that is broader than just one person or just one decision? Um, that's a really key question. As a social worker, I love thinking about systems. I love thinking about how people with all of our identities, right, fit into or don't fit into systems, and how different systems, interact. And so loneliness is tends to sometimes be a pervasive issue that is broader than just one person. But as Kristen was saying about self-acceptance and self-love, one of the goals that we hope to achieve with our audience through this series is thinking about this issue as a broader issue, but then how can we think about it in our own lives, and how can we take that first step to make our lives and the lives of people around us better. And so we'll be providing some tips further down the line in the session. Um, the other question too is like, is isolation really a bad thing? And my answer would be, it depends on the person. It depends on their goals, right? If someone really enjoys me time, quote unquote, right? If they need that time to recharge, a lot of autistic people on the spectrum, or who are otherwise neurodivergent, people with ADHD, social anxiety, their idea of being around people or being fulfilled by social time might look very different, especially if we're comparing it to neurotypicals, people who go out every day or every weekend. A lot of people on the spectrum enjoy environments that they can control. They enjoy their space, they enjoy things that they're familiar with. And so joining a group of people for a thing that is a little unclear, or not as not as uh, I would say, like, if we're not sure of the environment yet, it's a lot harder to get out there. So I just that's a part of validation I really want to put out there too, is taking this first step into an environment that we might not know about yet is definitely creates some anxiety, but hopefully we're able to provide some tips, some neurodiversity affirming environments that are safe. And then of course, as I said, we compare our own sort of progress through the lens of what we see in the media. I'll talk about that a little later. But our ideas about how well we're doing sometimes end up being compared to movies, things we see on social media. So just wanted to get that out there, that goals can look different for everybody, right? And sometimes we get into this trap of comparing ourselves to others. What I really like is comparing ourselves to, how we feel and what we want to get to in our own lives. I think that's really valuable as a thought. So as Kristen was eloquently going through the last slide, I realized that she was going through a lot of this. I just wanted to add, in addition to that sometimes we have internalized ableism as a function or as a result of our past experiences. And I just wanted to highlight, as I was thinking about this slide, sometimes I do this all the time. I might mess up in a social situation. I think about it for years. I think about it, probably maybe sometimes even 10 years. I'm like, oh, 10 years ago, I really messed up that one time. Right. And it sticks with us. And it really does. And so that's, I just wanted to like validate that, right, as something that a lot of people experience, especially people with social anxiety and people on the spectrum, people who are neurodivergent, right? I also just wanted to highlight that when we think about, right, like when we think about that thought of, oh, I messed up, I'm bad at social situations, um, if that's blocking us from going out in the future, we might ask ourselves, is there a reason that that situation that we're thinking of didn't go well? So I'm thinking of, if you're in like a loud, crowded area or something that is like sensory overwhelming, if you did that and you messed up in a social situation, um, that might be because you weren't, you were overwhelmed, right? Was the environment not conducive to you bringing your best self? And that actually might show growth actually over time, that maybe, we seek out environments that we do well in, that we thrive in. I think that's a huge step in self-growth, to know, where we do well and where we try to avoid. Um, for a lot of autistic people, it just tends to be, quieter, more predictable environments, and that's totally okay. The other thing I was thinking of too is, in the past, were we hanging out with people who weren't prioritizing our self-growth, or were they not interested in their own self-growth? Part of growing over time is learning who is good for you, learning who is good to be around. Who, in my mind, what I've learned over time too is like being around people who, want to see you do well, and want to see you happy and meet your goals, is a very positive thing. And sometimes, when we're just looking to make friends at all, sometimes we, get around people who aren't looking, aren't really prioritizing our mental health or our self-growth. And so that's really the step two, as we'll talk about later, is if you're going to try and make friends, just making sure that you're not making any friend, right? That the first person you meet might not be, a good friend. And so, that takes trial and error, obviously, but uh, thinking a little bit about that as in our past, if we didn't do well in a social situation and we've been thinking about it for a long time and it's on our mind, what are the factors that could have contributed to that? So it could be the environment, it could be the people. It could also be, a time in your life. If you were experiencing an event or, a series of emotions, maybe you didn't bring your best self, or maybe someone else wasn't bringing their best selves. And so that could also contribute to an action that happened that then, we think about as a failure, when in actuality, it just wasn't, we weren't doing our best at that point. And so that shows personal growth too, that, like I said, we just surround ourselves with people and environments that are good for us. And that can be the fuel that really drives us to success in the future. And also just generally being autistic in a neurotypical world can be isolating, can make us feel lonely. There's a lot of environments out there that are not as sensory friendly as we like, but there's also ways to get around that, going at different times, right? The same place can be different loud levels or noise levels at different times. Typically for restaurants, it might be like right before the dinner rush, like so 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock. It could be, maybe like towards the end of the night, right? It's similar for driving, right? The roads tend to be quieter, like during the middle of the day, like off rush
No sé
hour.
por qué dicen estas reuniones que van a
All right, so we're gonna go back to Slido. I hope everyone was able to get to Slido last time. Oh, actually, let me go ahead and share my screen again. I didn't mean to do that. So we're gonna go to Slido now. So we're gonna do our second question of the night, and it is a word, so it's gonna show the responses line by line. And so I think it's actually the same one, the same number. And so we really want to know, we want to learn what works for folks. Kristen and I have some things that have worked for us. But as a community of Zoom folks tonight, we have 31 people, which is a really good showing. Thanks everyone for being here. We really want to get, the ideas that we have, the assets of people, the experiences is really the assets here. Things that can help. So peer information, right? Stuff that's worked in the past from peers is really powerful, peer support. And so some really good ideas that people might be able to take and use in their own life, right? So music and support. Music is a huge way to build community. I was just at a concert the other day. If you like music, you like concerts, that's a really good way to maybe invite somebody who you know to go with you, or you can meet somebody at a concert that happens, right? Having conversations with close friends. A lot of people on the spectrum don't like small talk, and that's perfectly fine. And so being around people who you like talking to around same ideas, really deep conversations, that's great. This person says, what helps me climb out sometimes is getting a snack. Absolutely. I was just downing a Slurpee from 7-Eleven just recently. So I love a midday evening snack, right? And then if my parents and siblings are home, I talk to them about how I feel and tell my therapist. Absolutely. Having that support network, especially those natural supports, right? People who are going to be there for you all the time or whenever you need them. It's really powerful. Question is, when you feel lonely, what helps you climb out of loneliness? Journaling is a huge one. Sharing common interests, absolutely, yes, absolutely. We will talk about that a little bit later. Sharing common interests is a huge way that you can build a support system and make friends. My dog, yep, absolutely. And the thing about dogs too is, yes, you can talk to your dog, as I do all the time. But the dog doesn't necessarily talk back, right? I mean, they might like, whine or howl at you. That's not really a two-way. The dog is actually a really good way, just as a tip. Dog parks are a really good way to facilitate interaction, social interaction between people, obviously for the dogs too. But asking, simple questions like, how old's your dog? What kind of dog is that? How long have you had your dog? What kind of things does your dog like? Oh, my dog likes the same thing. There you go. And so that ties sharing common interests into the dog, right? So the dog might be an example of a common interest. Obviously, if you don't have a dog, you can still go to the dog park. I've definitely seen that. Right? You can just say, I really like dogs. Can I pet your dog? Right? But having that common interest might be easier if you have a dog to share. Almost like a show and tell. Let's see, authentic connection. Absolutely. Yes, this backs the research, right? This is a nice sort of story from your life, right? With other neurodivergent autistic folks that you really don't have to be masked with. That's huge. Masking is pretty draining, and in a neurotypical society and in a place where you might have to feel like you have to act a certain way or stop stimming. Being around people who don't care about that stuff necessarily is huge, and really also big for bringing your authentic self. As we were talking about earlier, right? Maybe if you think about ways that you might have messed up in the past that are keeping you from going out in the future, maybe you weren't hanging out with with the right people. Maybe they weren't autistic. Maybe they didn't understand you. Maybe you were actually masking, right? And so you were messing up, or what you perceive to be messing up. Um, that's all really huge in the way that we think about our own skills and abilities. Playing guitar, yep, similar to the dog. I'd like to see a dog playing guitar. That's good. It just popped into my head. But right, starting a band or playing guitar together. Someone takes the melody, someone else takes the harmony. Or you play sheet music together. And then maybe you go to an open mic, right? That's huge. Right. And those are some of those community outlets that are all out there. And someone, all famous people started somewhere, right? But even if you're not looking to be famous, even if you don't get famous, right, it's kind of a win-win. It's either you get famous or you meet people at the open mic. And so that's a really good way. Listening to music, right? Watching sports. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thinking about TV shows, right? Oh, hey, let's watch this new TV show that comes out. Either watch, with somebody, or maybe you're on an online forum and you're talking about the TV show. Also, just watching TV by yourself is fine too. But if you're tired of doing that, might consider doing it with someone else. Video streams, podcasts, absolutely. Yep, on special interests. So that's huge for the self-acceptance part, right? Seeing that other people have the same interests you do, and maybe learning more about that from other people. Yeah. And this is sort of thinking about the online spot, the streams. If you're going to start interacting with people that you meet online, that's why we have the next session on safety. Just, if you're thinking about getting out there, making sure you have those safety tools in your toolbox to make sure that we're all being safe, and in person and online. Keep myself entertained on my computer while sometimes looking for ways to meet new people in the future. Yeah. So that sounds like a very balanced response. That's really good. Calling close friends, right? Who just monologue about their day without asking me too many questions. Definitely. Yeah. So either you can monologue about your day, or if you are looking to maybe build that back and forth connection, maybe considering folks who, allow you to speak about your day. Definitely. Engaging in hobbies. Yeah. So special interest, hobbies, intense interests. My intense interest is trains, right? I'm a classic train guy, and so I can either go see trains by myself, or I can, I have other friends who like trains, and we can go see trains together, and then maybe you go grab food afterwards, and so you make a whole few hours of hanging out with people you like, and you doing stuff you like, and you get dinner out of it too. So, sort of building those opportunities, as we'll talk about in a little bit, for yourself. Spending time with pets. Parallel play, board games. This is huge. Yep. You go to a game store, they have tournaments, or they also just have open play, I think. There's also a place in DC called Boardroom. It is a bar, but they do also have board games. You don't have to drink or anything. And so that's a nice way for people to get out there and play board games. Telling a safe person you feel anxious. Yes, absolutely. Having those trusted people. These are so good. Thank you, everybody, for your responsiveness and authenticity. Writing a letter. Yep, absolutely. I love writing letters. I have some postcards right here, actually. Takes a while to get places, but it's something cathartic about postcards. Being your authentic self. And of course, yeah, getting outside of small talk. Looking forward to in the next 24 hours. This is a really good question that gets people thinking about, as we're in Thursday, right? We're heading into Friday, thinking about what you're doing for the weekend. It might sound like small talk, but actually people want to know. When you say, "Oh, how you doing?" Some people want to know, and just like the weekend, oh, you might learn about a festival or something, a fair or farmer's market that people are going to. Right. Yep, on Discord, body doubling. Yep. All good stuff. All right, everybody. Thanks so much for your responses. And we're going to head back to the slideshow. Start from presenter view. Let's see. Oh, that's not what I want. Oh no. Intro. Slideshow. Okay, sorry everybody. Okay. So the role of social media, just thinking about, right, like where we get these ideas from. We talked about it a little bit, but social media is great for a lot of things, to help us stay connected sometimes, but the things that we see on social media, right, the things that the algorithm feeds us, is based on our actions, and it has a lot of data actually about our interests and patterns. And so it feeds us more of what we like or don't like in order to elicit a response from us. And that's, it's basically based around advertising. And so just going on social media with the idea that what you're seeing might not be reality. And that includes, what people post. And so what you see where someone might be like really happy and always like hanging out with friends, it might be that they're actually sad. That sometimes people only post happy things. Right, that, sometimes if people are struggling, we might not see that. And so there's a flip side to that where whenever you talk to someone, you never really know what they're going through. And then also on social media, it's sort of similar because you might only see the happy, or the outgoing, because people generally don't want to post, how sad they are, how lonely they are. But also then that means that we only think that people, and then we compare ourselves to that, right? So we might only think, oh, we feel lonely when everyone else is out there, getting out there, making friends. And so just, taking what you see on social media with a grain of salt. I'll also add onto that movies, right, we see in the movie theater and stuff like that on TV shows, is curated, and sometimes it's scripted, right? So if we see loneliness, it might be in only one context versus when we see happiness, so you don't necessarily have to think about it too much, but definitely just keep it in the back of your mind. Keep that stuff with a grain of salt, that okay, this person, it keeps posting a lot of happy stuff, not necessarily like diagnosing them or anything, but then how that impacts our own self-thoughts, where it's like, okay, I might not comparing yourself that like they're always happy, I'm always sad, but there's probably a middle somewhere. So I think this one is Kristen.
Yes. Oh, can you please mute? Thank you. Okay, so going a little bit back into isolation piece, and some of this Stephen has covered, but I want to relate it to everything. So obviously we are a social species and we need connection, community to thrive. Over time, people incur mental health problems when they don't feel connected, like with that in group, like we talked about with the being on kind of the brink of society. This can also start early on in childhood, which is kind of where most of the research is, since autism occurs over the lifespan. So going back a little bit to research, research does state that autistic children experience loneliness more intensely and more often than their peers. And an issue pointed to that causes the most loneliness is a lack of friendships. Autistic children overall report a lower quality of friendships in general, and they tend to be on the outside of like their school social networks and just social networks in general. So you can see where these experiences and factors can lead to social isolation, withdrawal, and then that also obviously leads to loneliness because these factors kind of coexist, and that goes on into adolescence. You can see how this continuously goes on into adulthood. And this is an issue after people leave school, especially because that was kind of a structured environment and a structured, almost forced source of socialization. It can be even more of an issue if, as an autistic adult, you're not working, because the workplace can also be a source of socialization, even if it's like forced. You're seeing people there and you're like in the environment, you're around other people. Another contributing factor is that supports and services available to autistics do decrease once autistics leave school and become adults. There are fewer social outlets in general, but a big thing too isn't just that, but it's the perception of fewer social outlets, because the adults and their families just may not know about existing social opportunities because maybe they're not connected with their local autism organizations and things like that that provide some of these social outlets. Examples of mental health issues have been touched on as factors associated with increased loneliness are depression, anxiety, and having thoughts of suicide. Suicidal ideation is a major issue in autistic adults, so I did want to mention that. And it can obviously be linked to feelings of loneliness and a lack of acceptance from society. And I'll go back into like isolation and some things you can do a little bit later. And I think now Stephen is going to be doing a slide.
Yep.
Self-medication, yes, okay.
Yeah, so just wanted to touch on this briefly. I know we mentioned a little bit with regards to, different social environments. A lot of socializing tends to happen around bars. And these places can be loud, they can be unpredictable, with a lot of sensory stimulation. Obviously it's perfectly okay, perfectly fine to not want to drink. But also there is co-occurrence in the research between autism and substance use disorder. And so just want to put that out there that sometimes people do find it, there tends to be a pattern where you might drink and find it easier to socialize, and just wanted to, bring that up. That pattern does exist and can potentially create like addictive behaviors, right? And so some people in the past have used this as a way to cope with social anxiety or other mental health issues. And so there, if you're experiencing this already, there are treatment options for that. But also just knowing that, if you're at a bar or whatever and you're with people who, might always, oh, let's go to the bar, let's drink, it's perfectly acceptable not to drink. You can still go to the bar, actually. The movement towards mocktails, right? Starting with an M, mocktails, right? Like, orange juice and, spritz of seltzer or whatever with a lime. I make, it's basically juice, and it's non-alcoholic. Right. There's a huge market now for non-alcoholic or low alcoholic, just like a little bit here and there. That movement is growing because there is a notice, right, that you can socialize and not have to drink or any of that. And so you can get you can order like a cranberry juice or something, and then add seltzer or soda water. That's perfectly fine. Right. But then at the same time, if you're with people who might judge you for that and like, oh, why aren't you drinking with us? Like bringing back some of those peer pressure vibes, you might consider, are those the people for you? Are those the people who really think about your well-being, right? About your or if you also say like, oh, I don't really think the bar is the place for me, and they're like, no, come out to the bar, that also might, if right, as a variable that the bar is not the place you like to be, the environment for you, and you're with people who might pressure you to do that, you might consider, okay, is this the arrangement that I want to find myself in? And just going back to the not finding any friends just because they're a friend, right? Not finding the first person that comes up, really making sure that the match for you is healthy and part of your goal setting. And Kristen?
Okay, so yeah, just to talk a little bit about COVID, that not so silent elephant in the room. Autistic loneliness, similar to the general population, was an issue before COVID. Staying at home, social distancing in a lot of places, kind of closing, services closing down, all of that all furthered isolation. Even Autism Society of Maryland back then, HCAS, we started kind of doing everything online. That's just kind of what we had to do because we were having a health epidemic. But then on the other hand, working from home and having fewer social obligations did benefit some autistic people. And I think there was kind of a unification of all people in general because of that. So we might have felt more comfortable with people because we were kind of like all as a world experiencing the same thing. So the question is, where are we now? Unfortunately, while a lot of other people might have gotten back into the world despite the epidemic not being actually over, a lot of autistics may still struggle with loneliness and isolation today, post-COVID. Since we tend to be creatures of habit and routine, it can be hard for autistics to break that routine of staying inside versus making that, seemingly drastic change to go back out into the world that has since opened back up to them. Health anxiety is also still an issue that's prevalent. Fears if you're vaccinated, but not everyone wants to be vaccinated, and not everyone wears masks and that sort of thing. Different beliefs. Some people may be immunocompromised, since a lot of people on the spectrum tend to have some co-occurring health issues. Unfortunately, COVID is still here and can't change that right now. It might be here forever. We don't know. We do need to be aware of it and cautious, but there's also a difference between taking healthy precautions in life versus not fully living your life. So one thing you can do is you can do research yourself using websites like the CDC, also asking your doctor, or getting a doctor if you don't have one, and asking about preventative measures to feel more comfortable when going out. Asking questions ahead of time in terms of the facility or the event you're going to, asking those facilitators and the people hosting, how many people do you expect? How big is the area? Is some of the activity outside, etc.? And then making kind of a decision from there, because as autistics, we tend to have less anxiety if we really know what to expect and can be prepared. And we can help ourselves be more prepared and carry things like hand sanitizer, a mask, things like that, if we know we'll need them and we know where we're going to. So basically just figure out what you need in a situation that will make you feel comfortable going out and working towards making that happen. A quick side note though, and also I think somebody in the chat alluded to this, there are plenty of autistics who are quite content spending their time alone. And the thing is, though, this isn't just about socializing or being around other people and forming relationships, even though that's obviously important. It's also about just getting out there and being more active for your health. They say now that a sedentary lifestyle, if you don't know, is now known to be as dangerous as smoking cigarettes over time, which I thought was kind of crazy, but it's true. Taking part in physical activity can also increase our energy levels, and that helps our moods, like our depression. And so this typical advice that you might just hear all the time, that does actually apply to autistics too. And you can always start small and take baby steps, like Stephen said. Maybe if you haven't participated in physical activity for a long time, I know that was an issue for me post-COVID, you can start small. Maybe you just take a walk around your block, and you can listen to music if you're kind of having sensory overload when people are walking around, if you think they're going to be staring at you or anything like that. If you have a busy neighborhood, listen to music. You can wear earplugs, you can wear sunglasses, ththings like that. Just these kind of little things that can lower things like sensory overload, at least, to help you kind of gradually get back out there. You want to go to the next slide. Okay, so just a little bit about self-love. And obviously this is just an introduction to that topic, because we're going to be covering this over the 4-part series. But basically, self-love is an acceptance of yourself, including your strengths and your weaknesses. So one thing you want to do is give yourself some grace. Basically, people who struggle with depression and self-esteem issues, so obviously some autistics who struggle with these things, they've been shown to have more negative thinking in general, cognitively. So they overly focus on the negative thoughts, and that means you're emphasizing your weaknesses over your strengths, and you just don't really see your strengths that much. So that's just something you want to kind of be aware of, that when you're having those negative thoughts, that's oh, this is my brain doing this. I have strengths too, normalize your experiences and reflect on them. A lot of people struggle with self-acceptance for different reasons. Like Stephen said, and he struggled with this stuff too. It just appears differently. You can process these experiences with safe people. I know someone had said that was a great idea. If you don't have those safe people, and even if you do have them, but you need a little more help, or you want to do it with somebody who's kind of anonymous and can really help you out professionally, you can try out therapy, and you can use that to process your experiences in the environment that may have impacted your ability to accept yourself over time. The way you meet your goals might look different from other people too. You might need accommodations that other people don't need, and nothing's necessarily wrong with that, even if you're taught otherwise. It's just that you process things differently, like information and sensory stimulation. So one note on that is you might be more sensitive to stimulation than NTs. But like one example of like if a loud ambulance goes by, NTs don't necessarily love the sound of loud ambulances, right? It might overwhelm them too, but not to the same degree. So you're not seeing their frustration the same way. They might not cover their ears or might not distract them completely from what they're doing, but that doesn't mean that they don't feel it too. Also, you may need specific methods of taking in information. So different learning styles, visual, auditory, kinesthetic, or kind of that more hands-on learning style. We're not the only ones that have different learning styles. NTs have different learning styles too. They just might not need the same supports that we might need in order to process the information better. And lastly, no one is perfect. We're all works in progress. And this includes myself and Stephen. When it's easy to think, oh, we're perfect because we're sitting up here giving this talk. We aren't perfect, and we can struggle with these things too, and we do. And this also includes your family, your friends, anyone you might look up to, your role models, and it includes neurotypical people. Because like we said before, you're typically seeing people's highlight reels on social media or, today in the way that Stephen and I are presenting ourselves. We're doing public speaking, so we're going to be presenting ourselves a little bit differently. A lot of people only want to share what's typically seen as positive or share things that will help them conform to their peers and to society. We can try to be more compassionate towards ourselves when it comes to challenges. Again, reminding ourselves of our strengths and knowing that both strengths and weaknesses often have an opposite flip side, and that strengths can often help us compensate for areas of weakness. Usually when there's a weakness, that means there's a strength underlying it. You just kind of have to find it. If you're having trouble being compassionate with yourself, you can always ask yourself, if someone I cared about was in this situation instead, what would I tell them? So like, while you might not have the advice, obviously, it still gives you a chance to kind of like put yourself in those shoes when seeing the other person's perspective, since that can be hard for autistics with cognitive empathy. And similarly, it can be hard to see ourselves the way we see other people, because again, we experience and see everything that we go through ourselves, both the good and the bad. We experience and see all of that, but we only see these bits and pieces of other people's lives. You want to go to the next slide?
Yeah, well said. Thank you, Kristen.
Yeah.
So now we're getting to sort of some concrete steps, and we'll also be sharing some resources and ways to get started on some of this. I really like breaking down problems or issues that we might be solving into smaller chunks, right? And so for me, the question of, it's thinking about the issue at hand, depending on what it is. If you're looking to get out and make friends, or if you're looking to, like Kristen said, integrate yourself in the community a little more, find ways to be more active, and you're sort of at a loss for where to start. What I have really been thinking about too is tapping into our inner child. And I know we're thinking about adults here. But as we live life, right, sometimes we get all these messages and experiences, and it adds up. And sometimes we forget what we liked to do as a kid. And so to me, I've always liked trains. And when I go ride a train, or if I go see a train, it brings me back to, a certain time in my life that was positive, where I didn't have to pay taxes, and I didn't have to think about rent, right? And so going back to the things that we really like to do as a child, we change and we grow, but a lot of our interests sometimes they stay the same, right? We might add more, or maybe we might subtract, and that's okay. But thinking about what we really like to do, and I see some folks in the chat. If you want to put in the chat, what did you like to do as a kid? Where do you think you might start if you were to start getting out in your community, and doing things that you like? What were things you like to do as a kid, and is it something that's feasible to do maybe as an adult? That would be interesting to see in the chat. So, really tapping into our inner child, right? And things that give you joy. It sounds simple, but sometimes, either we, for me, I think way too hard about it. I'm like, what should I do today? And sometimes it's just as simple as, I don't know, what do you like to do? And that's also about noticing where you are that day, right? Having a little bit of mindfulness, a little bit of grounding technique, right? How are you feeling, because, you might find it easier to come up with something that would make you feel better if you know where you are mentally and physically that day. If you're tired and you're not feeling like going outside, someone telling you to go on a walk or go take a hike is it doesn't match, right? So knowing where you are mentally, how you're showing up that day is huge. It might be better to read a book that day or stay inside, um, you know, or have a friend come over instead of going over somewhere else. But at the same time, if you are feeling a little bit more adventurous, or if you're feeling like you want to get out of your house or wherever you are, noticing that is really a good idea to really match the activity with where you are showing up that day. So that's huge, right? Breaking it down into what you might do, what the location is, and with whom. Those are some of the three variables that I think about. And it's very autistic for me to think about my social life as a series of variables and plugging things in. But it's exactly how I think about it. And right, and people find that to be an attractive thing to be around because you're thinking about some of these things, and neurotypicals, they just kind of do it. They don't even think about it. They don't talk about it. They just do the activity. But for our purposes, if we're just getting started or we haven't done this stuff in a while, it might be nice to break it down into our units or our variables. So thinking about the activity, right, where you might do it, the environment, and of course, if you want to bring people along, making sure those people even want to do the activity or that they're good for you and your goals. Just some thoughts too, right? The activity that you choose to do might, in itself be isolating. So I noticed someone put, reading book at the bar. You can definitely do what's called body doubling. You can do, or sorry, parallel play is the thing. So you can be with somebody in the same room, but doing two totally different activities separately, but together, if that makes sense. So you're not engaging in the activity together, but you're both doing separate activities in the same space. And that way you feel connected, but you're also having your own sort of space and time to do your own thing. I was thinking about, some things that might be more isolating than others. And my first idea came to bird watching. And I'm not sure why I thought bird watching is isolating, but you might be like sort of, out either in the woods or like maybe, in different parks, but then it doesn't actually have to be isolating, right? Because you can invite a friend to go bird watching. We'll talk about meetup.com. There are bird watching groups. And so things sort of broadening or shifting our framework, right, of doing something by ourselves, maybe doing it with people, and how do we shift that? And then just also activities based on our identity and who we are, right? So, do you want to join an autistic activity group or social group? We'll be giving some resources at the end for those, but those exist around the county, and a lot of them are a place where you can meet really fun people that also have probably similar interests and also life experiences. So finding activities that are based on the interest, but also who you are, right? So those are some initial ideas. The DMV, so DC, Maryland, Virginia area, is chock full of activities that are really wide ranging. We have really good resources here naturally and people built, right? So we have suburbs, we have cities, we have rural areas, we have parks, we have we have mountains, we have beaches, all within about 2 to 3 hours from here. And sometimes even going a couple hours away, the drive or the transit ride to get there is even part of the experience. So maybe potentially broadening your your reach, thinking about, okay, am I thinking like a mile or two, or am I thinking about, I might go for somewhere that's 45 minutes away. Sometimes I like being connected to nature. That's how I sort of become more grounded with myself. This weekend, I'm going to Shenandoah National Park, which is about 2 to 3 hours away. And that's an idea. You certainly don't have to go that far. If you're calling in from Maryland or somewhere close, there's certainly places, obviously if you're in a more rural area, it might take a little longer, but, generally half an hour, 45 minutes away, or even closer there's a lot of stuff to do. Right. So thinking about, are you going to do the activity by yourself? Are you going to go with people? How are you feeling that day? Thinking about making plans, right? So you don't have to do it in the moment. Some people are better with spontaneity, right? Doing things on the spot. Other people really like to plan. And so, thinking about a day that works for you, and making sure that the person, if you want to go with them, that they're also available. I think Kristen talked about this earlier, but making sure that you're aware of the environment before you go there. So if you're expecting a quiet environment, it tends to be louder. The decibel level can actually change at different parts of the day. And so calling the place ahead of time, no shame in that, right? Just making sure like, hey, I'm thinking about coming over to your restaurant or to your store. Are there times that it's less busy because I, have, sensitivities to sound, or I just don't like being around a lot of people? That is absolutely okay to do. No shame whatsoever in that. And that it really sets yourself up for success, where you can bring your authentic self and you can create a memory or an experience that is positive and can actually help you boost your self-esteem for the future. There's things right on the state, county, and city levels. Montgomery County is where I live right now, and there's lots of stuff through the Department of Parks and Rec. Lots of trails and stuff around there. Trails are not always the most accessible depending on your mobility needs. So there are other nature centers if you're interested in getting out into nature. Maybe bringing a friend or two to the nature center, making a day of that or something. Is a nice way to get started. We mentioned meetup.com, making sure that you are connecting yourself with groups that, have similar interests. Also making sure that the age range is relevant to where you are. Some groups tend to be older, some groups tend to be younger. So just making sure you're matching the demographics with what you're looking for in terms of age. After the pandemic, or especially during the pandemic, a lot of people went online. I think people are slowly figuring out how to get outside again. And as we're coming out of some of that isolation or social distancing, thinking about how do we socialize again? I think that's something that neurotypicals actually had a moment of clarity, like, oh, people on the spectrum, I wonder if they've been thinking about like this the whole time, because neurotypical people were forced to isolate, and then as people started going out more, they almost forgot how to socialize after several months or something inside. And so that's just an interesting tidbit that I feel like maybe people who aren't on the autism spectrum might find some similarities in that. I'm always about creating opportunities for yourself. And so thinking about if something doesn't exist already, figuring out how we can create that opportunity for ourselves. So how do you get something started? So the classic example would be like, if there's no parties around, or if there's no gatherings around, can you start a gathering and you invite people over? Oh, if you have any friends, invite them too. So, opening up your space if you're comfortable with that, providing the chips, right? Asking people if they have any dietary restrictions, obviously, if you're going to provide food. But that's a huge asset. If you're comfortable with hosting, if there's something that doesn't already exist, a huge way to create these opportunities for ourselves is to volunteer to host a gathering, bring some board games, maybe have some tunes. That way you can actually be a way for people to create those experiences and promote their own self-worth while also making yourself, you know, the life of the party or whatever, and having people over is a huge way to combat loneliness and isolation. So I'll let Kristen talk about some resources.
Okay, yeah. So I kind of wanted to get to the Q&A soon, but this is just kind of a list of some of the social opportunities in terms of resources. And I just kind of put the quick list here because actually once we do the follow-up email, thanking you for coming and all that, I'm going to also include the list of resources and a description on each. So don't worry, you'll be getting this information probably next week.
Great. So we wanted to open it up for some question and answer. I know we have about 15 minutes until the session ends, and we had some questions ahead of
Questions in the
time.
chat too.
Yeah, and some questions in the
I'm not
chat.
sure we're going to get to everything, but we can always follow up later if we can.
Yeah.
Absolutely, we'll share contact information and Kristen could follow up.
Mhm.
Do we want to take one? We had some that were submitted with registration. Do we want to kick it off with one of those?
Sure.
When might be a good time to tell someone you're dating that you're on the spectrum? That is, if your date is not on the spectrum. Or friends, I guess, could work that way too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. That can be platonic as well, like a non-dating scenario too. Really, that's a great question. So disclosure, sometimes we think about that in the workplace, but in everyday life too, if you're in a social situation or if you're in a relationship or something, you know, disclosure is really a personal decision. So my answer would be twofold. Like if you think it's relevant, right? If you think someone needs to know, or if you want to tell somebody, if it would be important. And then also like if you feel comfortable, right? So sometimes people might think of you differently if you tell them you're autistic. I tend not to want to be around those people. If someone's going to treat me differently because I'm autistic, I don't really want to be around them. So that might tell you a lot about them as a friend, actually. And so that might be a way that you can tell whether or not they support you and your goals, right? A lot of times they just might have questions, and that's totally okay. Asking questions and wanting to know more is perfectly fine. I don't think there's a timeline necessarily for that. It's really about how well you know the person, where you know them from, and then, you know, if you think it would be beneficial or how you.
I would also say to add on to that,
Jerry, can you guys mute?
to add on to that, I would say while it's personal decision and everything, if you decide you want to disclose that information, you might get a more authentic relationship, and you might want to do so at a time where you can really kind of get into it and provide them with some education. Because, you know, especially if they don't know that much about autism, if you're able to educate them at the same time and relate it to how it comes across in you, that can really go a long way. And like Steven said, you know, if it's somebody who no longer wants to accept you once they hear about your autism, is that somebody you actually want to be friends with, or would that be damaging, you know?
Let's and guys, if you have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. Here's one. Let's see. Is loneliness one of the roots of bullies? Not sure what that.
Yeah, I saw that question in the chat. That was very
Yeah.
interesting
Well,
to me.
I think that ranges, to be honest.
Is that, yeah, do some autistics seek attention? I guess when they're isolated, I think that's what the question is getting at. Do lonely autistics tend to seek a certain attention?
I don't know, Kristen. I'm not too sure about the attention part, but I could speak a little bit about the bullies and loneliness. There's a lot of reasons why people might turn into bullies. You know, sometimes, you know, they might be going through things themselves. And so, yeah, I think, you know, just going back to the idea that, you know, we might not know everything about somebody just based on how they present. But, you know, someone might be projecting some feelings onto other people, or insecurities that they might have by making themselves feel better by bullying other people. So that definitely could be a thing. I don't know if you have anything to say about the attention part.
I'm kind of confused about the question. I'm not sure if you mean like if when you're lonely you tend to seek more attention or have like attention seeking behaviors or what. But I mean it would make sense that if you're feeling lonely and you're isolated that you would be seeking more attention, and it doesn't have to be a bad thing, you know, that means you're trying to meet a need.
All right, thank you. Let's see what we got here.
I see we also have a question. Is Donovan, do you have your hand up?
Yeah, go ahead, Donovan.
Do you want to go ahead and unmute
Or if you
yourself?
want to type in the chat, you can do that too if you don't want to
Yeah.
say it out loud. Maybe they forgot. Well, let us know if you want to do that.
There was another one in here about, let's see.
Yeah, I'm trying to scroll up. There's a lot in here.
Yeah,
It's
there's
great
a
you guys
lot of good
participated. I'm
comments.
just trying to figure out where the questions were.
I find sometimes I desire being social, but don't have the bandwidth, and people aren't used to my unmasked face, which adds to the exhaustion. So I guess being being social, and maybe that's Cortez's, am I getting that correct? That can sometimes be exhausting, the act of socializing.
Yeah, so I feel like I'll spend a lot of times by myself and want to be social, but then feel like I don't have the energy to do so. And like there's been times where, you know, I've gotten really desperate where I push myself. And when I'm pushing myself, I'm like, okay, like now the lights are bright, and like now I feel like people are picking up on like my facial expressions and reading me as not friendly. And when like I just want people to like say hi and like talk to me for like 5 minutes. But so on those days I give myself credit. So I've learned that what I do is I'm like, okay, I need to go home. I need to get some sleep. I got to make sure I like do the things that I need to make sure that I'm taken care of so I can be more present in those spaces. And I found, and you know, I would have not thought about that otherwise had I not known that I was autistic.
Mhm. Yeah, that's huge. Yeah, thanks so much for that comment. I definitely am a huge fan of, you know, like knowing how you're showing up each day and then matching your activities with your mood. You know, our bodies and minds sometimes do wacky stuff, and you know, one day you're happy, one day you're not. It could just be something as simple as the weather, or you don't get, you know, maybe you wake up on an off, you know, your REM sleep, so your deep sleep. Sometimes you don't get as much deep sleep one night, and you wake up feeling groggy. Um, Someone also mentioned being off, you know, medication that can also definitely affect how we approach the day or how we show up. So, yeah, I would say, you know, being mindful and sort of taking stock each day. You know, if you want to build it into your routine, building yourself a checklist, maybe like how am I showing up each day? Like how do I feel today? What do I want to do today? Do I want to be around anyone? You know, sometimes the answer is yes, sometimes the answer is no. And just because you don't want to be around anyone that day doesn't mean that you're lonely or isolated, right? It just means like that day you're not into it. And so to something else you mentioned too is also like communicating that. So communicating, you know, if you're low affect or if your face shows one thing but your brain says another, communicating that, like just, you know, communicating how you actually feel, and then, you know, that takes away any of the misconception, I would say.
Kristen, can you share, and we can put it in the chat too. We have we have an adult social group meeting coming up.
Yeah, I could share that. I'd actually put out an email with that information, but I can let me see. And I can do that in the follow-up email too. So that's going to be next Thursday, actually, 25th, at a different time slightly. It's going to be at 6 p.m. So not 7, it's going to be from 6 to 7. And the last one was a lot of fun for people that were there. It's basically a little creativity workshop with a creativity specialist, and she's really great at what she does. She does a lot of artwork, and she kind of like just takes us through these little exercises, and it helps with mindfulness and connecting our left and right brain. So I will put in the chat when that's going to be, and I'll also make sure to include that on the follow-up email.
Do you have events like this frequently?
Oh, sorry, I was typing. We kind of just started because we expanded into Montgomery County and Anne Arundel at the end of last year. I wasn't sure if you wanted to talk more on that, Melissa.
Sure. We have a group in Howard County, although there are people who are not from Howard County in that group. And that meets twice a month, once virtually and once in person. So that's each month. You can sign up to get those emails. The next meeting will be, they're going to Crabtown Arcade in Glen Burnie on the 20th.
Is that Crabtown Arcade?
Crabtown Arcade, yes. I
Okay, that
think
sounds
it's the
fun.
27th.
Wow.
Pretty sure it's the 27th.
Nice.
And then, as Kristen said, she's got a group that's just kind of started out and had a couple of meetings, pretty much monthly. And we'll put all that in the follow-up email so you guys have that. The Autism Society Baltimore Chesapeake has a monthly group that meets. There are other groups that, again, we'll share. Stephen is with DC Peers, which has a lot of great activities. And so we'll certainly share that as well. And
Yeah,
then
I'll include all those in my follow-up email. All of those were on the resources list.
Perfect.
Because I feel like I've been looking for groups like this for years. Like basically, I got my diagnosis and no resources, and luckily I have a job that's very accommodating, and like I'm like, oh my goodness, this is how I want to be treated, and like that's what has allowed me to push myself to be more social than I had been in the past.
Well, that's good to
So
hear.
yeah, so getting that acceptance from society and your environment helps you with feeling better and accepting yourself, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, like it's changed my whole world view. I'm like, what is happening?
That's great news.
That's amazing.
Also, Andrew posted in here. Andrew, you must have attended the holiday party that Kristen
Oh yeah, Andrew, hi.
referred, so that's great, and found it easier to socialize than most in-person events. So that's good.
That's a
good to
big
know.
thing, yeah.
Appreciate that.
Having
Thank
those
you.
events with autistic people, with your autistic peers instead of like typical NTs, that can feel a lot more relaxing and costs kind of less energy, and you can kind of put that mask down more.
And question, will there be more activities in Montgomery County? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, they'll be coming. So look for those. And again, we'll follow up with all the good information. So we're just about at time. Do we want one more quick question here? Do we have one more in the chat that we need to get
Seen
to?
one somewhere that I wanted to oh, I thought it was interesting. It wasn't a question, but Brianna had said some things that are enjoyable when you're a kid are deemed appropriate for adults, like going on swings, climbing trees. I'm guessing on animals, which I like to do. I guess I would challenge that because you know what? Even if they aren't deemed appropriate, what's going to happen if you do them? Like why not just have fun and go for it? Stephen, do you have anything to add on that? It's easier said than done because I have like social anxiety and stuff too, but I just try to honestly ignore that. And once I try to do that, like baby steps, I find I can start enjoying myself more.
Yeah, it's a process, right? Thinking about our own capabilities. And, I think that's why I talk a lot about reframing because, getting started is not as easy as just like, setting up a gathering or going to some place. A lot of times when we have thoughts about where to go and what to do, we're stuck because, we're thinking about what we've done in the past. And if you have social anxiety or generalized anxiety disorder, GAD, you know, there's a lot of cognitive blocks, a lot of mental blocks that sometimes occur. So I'm a huge fan of thinking about, you know, where these thoughts come from and then putting the tools in place to get started. So really enjoyed today. I thought the discussion was wonderful. Thank you everybody for being here. It's been really stimulating and engaging.
Yeah, thank you both, Kristen and Stephen. Looking forward to the next session, which will be June 20th. And I believe you'll be talking about online connections, friendships, how to leverage that. I just put our website in the chat. We have lots of events that go on. There's a calendar there, there's resources there. I'm going to put Kristen's email in here and she'll be following up.
Mhm.
So
And
thank you
we
all.
definitely can follow up on the questions we didn't get to too, because I know there were some in the chat, I think, and then we had some kind of starting out at registration. So Stephen and I can definitely follow up with those probably like within the week.
Very good. Thank you
Do
all.
you,
Have a great night. We'll see you in June 20th.
Bye,
do you
Or
have
next
spaces
Thursday.
Huh?
for, do you have space for people who would like to volunteer?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We have particularly for
Mhm.
events, if you're interested in that. I'll put my email in here.
I'm
if you want.
guessing cornhole will need some we'll need
Yeah, our
people.
walk, our pool parties. Yeah.
Yeah. We've got some stuff
Yeah.
coming up where we could use some help.
Cortez, where do you work? Sounds like a wonderful place.
You know, I work for the American Red Cross. I'm a volunteer recruiter.
Oh,
And
really? Okay.
and what's amazing is I'm queer and so my pronouns are they them, and I'm the first in the region. So my boss had a culturally competency training before I got there. I was
Wonderful.
out about being neurodivergent, and he was saying that, you know, recruitment is an art, not a science. So, you know, like you'll bounce some ideas. So like I might not agree with all the ideas. Like don't feel like you're in trouble. And I just want to work in the way that your brain works. And I've never felt that supported in my life. Like at first,
That's
like I would
amazing.
just like I would just cry because I've never been treated like this.
That's so
And
great. That's so great to hear. And I'm immediately thinking we have a lot of individuals who, you know, they're working up to employment, and it's very hard to find a volunteer opportunity that is accepting. So I definitely want to make sure we connect with you. And I mean, if you're looking for people, we've got great folks who are looking for just some experience or
yeah,
opportunity to volunteer. So
yeah, and we have a variety of opportunities. So for example, we have like sound the alarm where folks go out in teams and install smoke detectors in neighborhoods, and it's like a 4-hour thing. We typically provide food. And
mhm,
then also like there's ongoing things like helping out at the military hospitals, being caseworkers. Yeah, so
nice.
we could definitely I can put my email so we can continue the conversation.
Yeah, please do. That's great. I'm so glad you found such a great situation. That's really just so good to hear. Yeah, good. Okay.
And they had even someone had reached out to me from the quality control department for people to talk about neurodiversity within their group. And they're going to, from that, they're going to create a plan to make the workplace more inclusive. And I was like, this is amazing. I've been here like less than a year.
Wow, that's just amazing. Good to hear about those things. We have an autism hiring program, and we do some, training for employers, and it's so important. It's
No.
so important. So it's good to hear the Red Cross is really embracing all of that. That's great. All right, you guys, I'm gonna go grab some dinner. I'm gonna stop the recording.